Hi everyone. So let's make a start. My name's Lewis. I am the networking event designer. I'm a third year chemist at the University of Warwick, and helping me co-facilitate is Alex. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. I am currently not a student, but I'll be beginning my doctorate in August for clinical psychology, and I am ASC's education program supervisor.
Okay, great. Lovely. Okay, so this event is split into two parts. In the first, I'll present to you some concepts and allow for points of reflections. And in the second, I'll provide some hacks or tools that either I've tried before or tools that other companies use that are successful. And then you can apply them in the activity in part two. So I hope you can stay for that. But the main goal of this event is to allow you to create your own definition and conceptualization of creativity. Does anyone know who these people are? So in 1919, 1 million Model T cars were sold, which essentially made the company huge. And in this picture from Peaky Blinders, there's a Model T car. But each model required some parts for wood. So it required wood for parts. So the frame, the dashboard, steering wheel, and the wheels themselves, which this large amount of wood usage for production gave rise to Henry Ford wanting to produce his own supply. So he enlisted the help of Edward G. Kingsford, which is a real estate agent in Michigan, to locate a supply of wood for him. And they ended up acquiring a large timberland in Iron Mountain, Michigan. And in the early 1920s, they built their own sawmill and pot plants in the neighboring area, which became Kingsford, Michigan. The mill and the plant provided sufficient parts for the car, but it produced a lot of waste. So the stumps, the branches, and the sawdust, but they didn't know what to do with the waste. So Ford kind of took stock and he took a look at the waste and he suggested that all the wood scraps could be processed into charcoal. And in order to produce something useful out of this charcoal, they needed the help of a chemist. So they enlisted the help of Orrin Stafford from the University of Oregon, who helped to invent a method for making pillow-shaped lumps of fuel from sawdust and mill waste that they were generating. Combining that with the tar and binding them together with cornstarch, they produced what they called charcoal briquettes, which is something commonly known today. Funnily enough, Thomas Edison designed a briquette factory which was adjacent to the sawmill, and Kingsford ran that too. The plant producing the briquettes was a model of efficiency, and they were producing about 280 kilograms of briquettes for every ton of scrap wood. So you can imagine that waste that would have been gotten rid of otherwise was turned into a profitable idea. Initially, these briquettes were sold only through Ford dealerships, but the supply quickly exceeded the demand, with the amount of waste being accumulated. By the 1930s, Ford was marketing what he was calling these picnics kits, containing charcoal and portable grills through the dealerships and capitalizing on the connection that existed at the time between motoring and outdoor adventures. And then after World War II, the trend of backyard barbecuing really took off with the invention of the grill, migration, marketing efforts to promote post-war lifestyles. Later on, other companies took over the plant, but I really find this story really interesting because it showed how Ford was able to see something extraordinary, something really out of, like, something interesting out of a completely normal issue of waste. So I hope this sets the tone for reflection for how we perceive everyday things around us and how those nuggets of ideas that might be turned into innovation exist. Anyone seen this movie? Nope. Okay. So this movie is from Inception. This is by Cobb, and the character that's played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And at some point, he's sitting at the table and kind of pitching his services, if you like. I don't know if you've seen it, but he says, "What is the most resilient parasite? A bacteria, a virus, an intestinal worm?" And then he concludes the whole thing by saying, an idea is resilient, is highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold of the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. An idea that is fully formed, fully understood, that sticks right there somewhere. And I think that this is a really interesting way to think about ideas and how you come about them. What happens when an idea enters our brain? I'm going to introduce some things to think about, and then you can reflect on them in your breakout rooms later. So how do you come up with ideas? What is your relationship with coming up with ideas? And what are some of the biases that inform what kind of ideas we come up with? And how do we see them? What do we do once we've conceived an idea? Because personally, I think that ideas can be both helpful, but they can also be really toxic. Because once you fall in love with ideas, kind of brain babies, really, really quickly, we find it difficult to kill off those ideas or give it away to someone else. So again, that ability to come up with these ideas and act on them to create value is something that's really, really important. I also wanted to share this quote by Ed Maccabi, who was one of the leaders of the creative revolution and advertising in the 1960s and 70s. And he described creativity as one of the last remaining legal ways of gaining an unfair advantage over the competition. And I think that this is another way to connect back to the story of Ford that I started this session with, as again, something that has created an entirely new product and something that was helping Ford to compete, not only because of the charcoal briquettes, but actually thinking about how he created the whole supply chain, having that kind of wood production alongside the main factory that he had, and how he was able to generate that competitive advantage for himself. Here, I want you to think about the word creativity. What do you think of when you hear the word? What comes to mind? So I want you to conceptualize it. Perhaps you want to think about who do you think of when you hear the word creativity, and whether that person or company or concept is a positive or a negative one. So I think this is our first breakout room. So would anyone like to share anything that they've discussed or found anything interesting?
I can just read off my notes from our breakout room, if that's okay.
Okay.
We had words like creativity as a scientist, experiments, design, exploring, how can we think of new paradigms, creating something new, free-flowing, expressing yourself, let things go, being human, and innovation.
Wow, that's really interesting. Wow. Anyone else?
We just talked a little bit about autonomic arousal and kind of timing different phases of arousal with kind of different goals for creativity. If that makes sense. I could elaborate, or I'll just let it stop right there. I don't want to.
Please say more. Please say more.
Okay, so I referenced Andrew Huberman, who is a neuroscientist at Stanford, and he has a podcast out that he just kind of gives us great information. And his most recent podcast episode was on creativity. So he's big on circadian rhythms and arousal times and light exposure and phase shifting with body temperature, and how all of this influences our ability to concentrate, focus, neuroplasticity in general. And he talked about creativity and how you can time it with these different arousal times, and how kind of he breaks creativity into two different stages. One being the more abstract component of creativity, where it's kind of this flow of ideas and more abstract thoughts, and these would be kind of these more like creative endeavors. And the second part, and that would be done in more of a relaxed state. And then he talks about the second part of it, which is more of the linear component of creativity. So how are these more abstract ideas brought into actionable steps, or how do we execute these ideas of creativity? And he mentions doing it during these higher arousal times, when our attention is higher, when we would be able to focus more that would be a good time to try to initiate that component. So kind of working within your body rhythms for maybe better outcome if you have a goal for your creativity.
That's so
That's
cool.
really interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so wait, you can see my slide, right? Okay. So many of us associate creativity with this image of the brain, you know, one side of your brain being creative and another side of your brain being very logical. And I think that this is something that's particularly kind of entrenched, I guess, across different disciplines. From my own experience being a student at uni, I've certainly seen that this is something that many students believe and see as if you've come from a scientific background, you've been trained to think in an analytical way, then the creative part of your brain is non-existent or it's not really working properly. But I do want you again to kind of look at this image and think about what it makes you think about and whether you personally believe in the idea that you can or cannot be creative, because in fact many people do believe that creativity is a fixed trait, sort of God-given. But when we look at some of the evidence that we have when it comes to neuroscience, we know that this idea of polar sides of the brain as part of the creative process, it's a neuromyth. We know that creativity happens on both sides of our brain, and it's a very complex process that can't really be explained by these polarities. And as I mentioned before, creativity is a key part of nurturing that innovation mindset. So in order for us to start building that mindset, we really need to make these reflections to start building our understanding of the concepts and the definition. So the question you might be asking yourself is, am I creative? So I think we'll take this moment to pause and think, and someone can say their feelings to this question if they want to.
I wish.
One of the interesting things that comes up when we talk about creativity is that we associate creativity and the process of creating something with what's called the creative type. You know, you equate creative with artistic. Going back to that image of the different sizes of the brain, people can either be creative or not creative, or even we associate creativity with children, and it doesn't belong in the boardroom with businessmen and women. And we think that it kind of gets toxic, because I think that it stems from discomfort with creativity or insecurity in one's own ability for creativity. Like, it's easier to say it's not for me, I'll leave it to the creative types. But when we start thinking about creativity more in depth, it's actually an inherent survival mechanism for us, you know, like inventing the wheel or finding ways to make fire. And these have arisen from us looking at things from a different point of view, trying things out, think about them creativity. So looking at the pressures of daily life when we have to be stuck in routines, especially at uni, a lot of our weeks can look very similar. The more we are stuck in patterns and routines, the more we are repeating the same things every day, the more our creative muscle atrophies, because our brains constantly look for patterns. They constantly look for habits to simplify, to spend as little energy as possible and doing daily tasks just with like the fewest functions as possible. So creativity in that sense is breaking those patterns, looking at different points of view to generate ideas. So often for our brains, it can be painful and unusual, and it takes a little bit of time to switch to that mindset to approach things from a different way. Remember, I asked you in one of the slides, are you creative? Well, Warren Berger, who wrote the book, A More Beautiful Question, actually encourages us not to ask that question and instead to consider the following question. So that's him. Where did my creativity go? He nudges us to ask the following. In the following slides, I have a couple of things that will help you to unpack that in a little bit more detail. But at this point, I kind of want you to reflect on your own way of improving life or solving problems or creating small solutions in your daily life, which makes your life easier or simpler that you're already doing, but also thinking about some of the hobbies and things that you might have enjoyed before university started, or things that you used to do when you were younger as a child. Whatever it is, I'm sure there are pockets of creative expression that existed in your life that perhaps are no longer there. So think about, where did that creativity go? Next. Okay, so these are building on this idea I've just introduced by Warren Berger, I wanted to quickly introduce this wonderful set of questions, and his entire book, A More Beautiful Question, is about asking good questions. And so the specific ones related to creativity and kind of questioning different ways of looking at things are these 6 questions that will help you see the world differently. You might be asking yourself some of these already and apply these to specific situations. So the first one is, what might I notice if I were encountering this for the first time? So that novelty, that ability to see things from a fresh point of view is kind of the first key way to start seeing things differently. I mean, the way I relate to this, it sounds silly, but imagine you're walking home or to a specific place on one side of the road every single day, and you're used to the surroundings on that side of the road. And then suddenly, one day, you walk on the other side, and now somehow that familiar street that you walk on every day looks a bit different. I don't know whether that happens to you, but I find it fascinating how simply switching a point of view can have a huge difference. The second question is, what if I stand on the desk? So again, similar to my example of the street, but if you start looking at this problem or situation just from a different point of view from height, what is in the background? Again, sometimes we focus too much on the details and not really seeing the big picture. What other factors come into us understanding the situation when it comes to us being creative? What would fascinate a 5-year-old or a 90-year-old? Again, switching these lenses between different people's perspectives is also a really useful technique to think about ideas and problems in a different way. What would Seinfeld be amused by? Does anyone know Seinfeld? Or okay, so if you don't know, Seinfeld is a character from a kind of sketch show, but he makes everything funny and turns everything into a joke as a stand-up comic. So other little things that are already existing that you're not really seeing or perceiving in a specific way. And finally, what would Steve Jobs be frustrated by? Of course, a notorious innovator and an amazing example of an innovative thinker. What sort of things could he be looking at and be really frustrated with? What would he kind of feel that restlessness towards? So these would give you a starting point to think about framing that definition of creativity and your understanding of creativity and its practicalities as well. A interesting concept that I find is creative confidence, and the way we define it is this belief in one's own ability to generate creative ideas and bring them to life. So it's really about unlocking that creative potential and bringing something to life. This concept was introduced by the brothers Tom Kelly and David Kelly in 2013 in the book with the same name, which I really recommend. They believe that the real value of creativity doesn't emerge until you're brave enough to act on those ideas. That combination of thought and action drives creative confidence, the ability to come up with new ideas and the courage to try them out. They also relate to a study on creativity by Robert Sternberg, who studied creative people, and the main distinction that he was able to uncover between people who are creative and non-creative is the conscious decision of being in favor of being creative. Does that make sense? So I'll just leave that with you, I guess, to marinate for just a second to think about. It's a conscious decision to be creative that makes us creative. So imagine that power that we hold to change our own ability to come up with an idea is huge, but so many people don't exercise it because we believe in this theory of fixed traits, which is completely wrong. And so again, this slide is really an invitation for you to make that decision towards creativity and trust yourself that you have that creativity is within you, but it's just about building up the confidence to express that creativity in those ideas, especially when you're in a group setting. And one of the things that I wanted to mention before I move on to the next slide is that people that are creative and creators are not very good at predicting the outcome. Again, like very often we are apprehensive when it comes to sharing something creative because we're not really good. We think that we're not really good enough, or we don't know what the outcome is going to be, or what people think of the idea. People that design or are professionally creative, like artists, if you like, they don't know what the outcome might be. They have no way of predicting it, but it's really just about starting it, getting that idea out and sharing it with the world. And that will get you a lot closer to coming up with an innovative idea rather than just keeping it to yourself and iterating on it for too long. So again, something to reflect here. In relation to creative confidence and the concept that I will introduce in a moment of creativity, Scar, I also wanted to think about failure. So failure is a huge part of creativity and innovation, where there are things that are new or things that are disruptive. There's always bound to be uncertainty, whether that's from lack of understanding, lack of information, lack of complete information, which might stop us from doing things. And failure is one of those things that a lot of people shy away from. But it's really important to think about that in terms of innovation. One of the things that IDEO, a really famous design agency, talk about is this ability to squint when you're coming up with an idea. So, you know, this ability to look at something and just see the outline, but ignore the little inconsistencies. So you no longer see the surface details, you just see the shape of the idea. And if people come to you with their ideas, then you ask yourself, is there a kernel of an idea here? And if there is, spend a little time on it and maybe take the idea in a slightly different direction, because people will come to you with their ideas earlier in contrast to other leaders who don't squint at ideas, which is good because if people get too attached, they won't be able to hear their feedback. The point is you ignore the details initially and see the bigger picture and not kill those ideas that at least have some potential. These questions that I've left here are for you to reflect on. So what's the best mistake you've ever made? What's your favorite failure? For me, when I first heard that question, I thought, how can failures be your favorite? I mean, that's like complete rubbish. But the more I was thinking about it, the more I was appreciating how much I've actually learned from things that didn't go to plan, and how much I've benefited from those experiences that led me to ultimately to other things that I was better suited for. But we often brush things under the carpet and move on and really take stock of our failures. But is there learning in every single mistake that we've made? That I really want you to dig deeper as part of this session and think about some of the failures that you have that really taught you something. Perhaps you haven't been courageous or honest enough with yourself and kind of brushed them under the carpet. So what's hiding? Bring those ideas to the surface and unpack them. What's the best advice you've given or received about failure? I know that this is something that some people are great about talking about and some people find it difficult. So what are the sort of things that you've heard that really helped you to pause and reflect and reframe how you see failure? Maybe what's one valuable lesson you've learned from failing, especially in the context of university where there's so much competition and we're all pressured to look perfect all the time and academia pushes us to excellency. The important thing is that there's no innovation and creativity without failure because there's so much risk that is bound to happen. So for us, it's about learning to dance with failure and learning to coexist with that ambiguity that's part of the process. One of the things that I also learned through my innovation journey is killing your darlings. So as part of the creative process and innovating, you have to kill some ideas often, and that's okay. Like it's part of the process. As well as sometimes you have to give them away for other people to build on and make their own change because perhaps you don't have the tools or something else, but that will happen. And so learning to give them away and killing them off is an important part. The final point I wanted to make here is this little quote that I've added from one of the IDEO consultants, Diego Rodriguez, and he says that failure sucks, but instructs. And I think that this is a great way to summarize the importance of failure to innovation. Next, coming back to this idea of creativity, Scar, and linking again with creative confidence and failure into our conceptualization of creativity, is this great idea that I came across in the work of Brené Brown. She's a fantastic researcher from Texas, and she's also a TED speaker. She's got an amazing Netflix special, which I really recommend if you don't want to read the books, but obviously she's got books that really talk about the value of vulnerability and shame to creativity, innovation, leadership, and just general life. So just to reiterate, creativity is something we all have, we all exist with, and we're all able to use our imagination to create something new in the world. And in fact, we do that on a daily basis. But creativity, as we've established, is surrounded by a number of different myths. And so it's about confidence and probing what are your fears when it comes to creativity? Where have you lost it? What is currently blocking you from being more creative? Is it that excuse of, oh, I'm not really creative because I'm more analytical and scientific? Where does that actual belief come from? Is it something that comes from experience? This empirical idea that you hold, and are there any steps that you can take right now to become more creative? One of the things that helps me to probe those ideas and reflect on my own creativity is this idea of creativity scar. This is really the idea that we were all creative at some point, and because someone had said something negative or did something while we were expressing ourselves, especially as children, we have internalized a negative comment or a piece of feedback that didn't necessarily sit well with us. So we blocked an entire area of creative expression that we once had. And I've heard so many stories of, oh, I used to play guitar or I used to paint when I was at school. But when you really ask them why they don't do that anymore, they find it difficult to come up with an answer. So I'll start off with a story about one of my friends. She wanted to get into singing as a hobby some years ago. So she got a singing coach, and she found that she can sing the high notes quite well and also the low notes quite well. So in theory, she should be able to sing quite a broad range. But there was a huge chunk of the middle that she couldn't sing. And the two possible reasons were, one, she had a rare genetic mutation in her vocal cords, but I guess that was really unlikely. Or two, at some point in her life, someone told her to either shut up or stop singing or whatever kids say nowadays when they want to be mean. While she was expressing herself creatively, so her brain has blocked out an entire range because she internalized that comment. I find it crazy how someone's comment can make an impact on someone's biological and physical ability to produce sounds. So this story helped me to redefine my relationship with how I receive and give feedback, but I hope this also helps you think about some of the ways in which you've hidden your creativity, or perhaps not being able to express yourself creatively because of something that happened. Okay, so second breakout room session. Does anyone want to share anything that they've discussed?
We talked about how you can have like a unique thought, but people might not always be receptive to your idea. We talked about how like sometimes like science can be really rigid and precise, and that's hard on creativity. We talked a lot about the idea of like resilience and how scars are temporary and like sometimes you need to heal from them. We talked about uncharted territory, intuition, sometimes figuring out whether a thought is worthy can be scarring because then you have to kill your idea, like our friend was saying earlier. You have to like feel it all out, put your feelers out for ideas, and then what kind of value do we give other people's thoughts and judgments?
Yeah, we had a mini group therapy session. As Anirudh said, we were just like venting real quick, but it was nice. It was a nice bonding experience.
I'll just kind of mention what I mentioned to you, which is I love the presentation. It's of good value. However, just from an alternative perspective, I think we're talking about creativity as like a means to an end, but I think that there's a lot of value in the process. Maybe even creativity is the process. And I think that we can maybe even stifle our ideas or our creativity if we're set on having to have something tangible at the end of it. And I one example I used was that children, when they're playing, they're gaining social experience and sensory information and motor skills and all of these things. But they would never know that. Like, they're playing for the sake of play and enjoyment. And from that, the secondary outcome of these benefits happens. So that's kind of how I see creativity, is that it's a process. There's like an essence of creativity. And if we allow ourselves to really be into that creativity, then it can result in kind of these things that we couldn't even imagine, these outcomes, these flow of ideas, that kind of thing.
Maybe I'll add that in my experience as a graduate student in neuroscience, you learn to think within restrictive boundaries that are enforced by the limitations of your experimental methods. For me, I feel that thinking in that way for the last 5 years has caused me to think in that way outside of the lab, where I now have trouble becoming creative because I always think, okay, this is my end goal. What are the tools at my disposal that can help me get to that? What are the actual questions I can ask? Rather than just being like, let me free-flowingly think through this and think of how this could possibly be done if there were no restrictions. I always think in terms of restrictions now, and it's annoying.
And something to add on failure, like sometimes a failure is not a failure, because sometimes it's just a failure to other people, but that doesn't mean that you failed on somehow. Because as Ali, she said that it's a whole process. Doesn't because you didn't didn't reach your goal, like an end goal. You had a whole process that you learn more, you became more creative in the process, and you did what you had to do, and you was good. But sometimes to other people you are not good, and then you are a failure, and then you have creativity scar and all that. But sometimes you have to think if I was a failure or just other people think I was a failure, because it is on their mind and not in my mind. And something that you always have to remember, because sometimes a failure, it's not a failure.
Okay.
May I also add, sorry, Lewis, I want to give a inspiring creativity scar story that I just remembered from my own life. Maybe 2 years ago, I was in the lab and I was talking to a lab member, and we were saying, how can we measure this one thing? You know, how can we create a new way to measure this? And I said, I have an idea, and I kind of drew it up on a board, and we were talking about it, and she said, that's cool. And I was like, yeah, this is cool. I'm really excited about it. And then this one guy in my lab walked by, and he was like, what's this? And I explained it, and he's like, that'll never work. That's stupid. Nobody will ever buy it. And he like really tried to shoot down this creative process I was having. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm right, even though you think I'm wrong. And I ended up doing the experiment, and it's now published, and it's a paper. So it actually worked. But also something I said in the chat, in that case, I felt really confident in my thought. But for a lot of the time, your ability to push through negative reviews from other people, you know, negative comments, depends on how confident you are in that topic. And creativity is really, a lot of the time, it's exploring uncharted territory. So you have no confidence to build off of. So when someone shoots it down, it's so easy to say, you know what, that person's right, because you have no evidence to support you at that time.
Look at us.
Okay. Oh.
We're so amazing, like sharing our stories and thinking outside the box. So I'm really happy that everyone's doing that. All right, that's it.
Okay. Okay. So we are moving into part 2, the creative activity, I guess. So this is Scamper, which stands for substitute, combine, adapt, multiply, magnify, put to another use, eliminate, rearrange. This is a creative tool that's used for, I guess, from an innovation point of view. So starting with KitKat, it starts off with the KitKat that you know. If you substitute different chocolates, it will become a different product. If you combine different flavors or whatever, it will become KitKat Chunky or KitKat Lemon. If you adapt it, you can make it into an ice cream. If you magnify, multiply, it can become a singular bar. If you put to another use, it can become a drink, and that's a different product. And then you can rearrange or eliminate it and make it into bite-sized pieces. So I think each group will have a different product to do for Scamper using this tool, but I think first we're going to use lightning demo. So this is something that Adrian Smart, I think they came up with, and it follows Google Ventures methodology. It's really a research task just to gain inspiration. So say like you've got a problem, then you will do a lightning demo, and it's really good because you don't have to stay in your discipline. It's really interdisciplinary. So for example, say like you were using Scamper, and then I decided to look at Spotify for my service. Spotify doesn't have to like relate to the problem, but you can get a big idea. So you write down your big idea of Spotify that you really like that will help you solve the problem, and then you kind of present that to your group, and then each group will have a set of solutions, and then you can take that on to the problem, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
So right now we only have 2 groups. Maybe your group can have the shopping cart, and then my group will have the umbrella.
Okay.
It is a backpack. There's oh wait, no, it's not a backpack. We changed our mind. It you know the IV rolly the rolly things that hold the IV bags. It's that, and then it has like some super awesome wheels on the bottom of it, so it can go anywhere, and it completely covers you. If you want, you can have a backpack on it. Maybe you can get like a chair added so you can like wear it to football games and stuff. Adapt. Okay, so we adapted it to have some like pH or like litmus things, so you can like check like the UV of the day, or like the pH of the acid, or whatever other things that you might need to measure to multiply and magnify. We thought about that. We thought maybe you could like have an army of them and like have lots of arms to hold them, or you could maybe have like make it just really big, you know, and then put to other use. There's lots of uses: backpack, sunglasses, chair.
Don't forget the hater.
Oh, blocks all the haters out. What else did I forget? I'm sure I'm forgetting lots of things.
Well, no, we still have the other letters.
Oh,
What letters on now?
you know how like some of the umbrellas fold upwards instead of downwards? We thought that if you folded it upwards, it would shoot the acid out, and so then now it's a weapon. We eliminate. What did we think about for eliminate? Remind me.
I was saying, so that's kind of where we got into like the chair, because, well, I guess we're actually adding, but for an example of that is like you're eliminating the handle. So if those umbrellas that like strap around your head and then you don't have to hold it.
Yes.
Because as Vivi said, we don't want to eliminate the top part of the umbrella, because then it's just a stick.
Lewis is not impressed with our ideas.
Lewis, trust me, we explored all creative avenues.
I find it so good. It's so fascinating.
But yeah, that's our umbrella.
Thanks. Right, your turn.
Ali, would you like to go? Would you like to?
Why, sure, I'll go. All right, so, and maybe you guys can chime in because we had a lot of ideas flying around. So we had the shopping cart. First was substitute. So we thought material. So typically a shopping cart's going to be made of heavy metal. So we thought more sustainable materials, some type of mycelium or hemp, something biodegradable in these times, but something that would withstand like a weathering, or an option for weathering. Should I just give the overall idea rather than go through kind of so we felt like we could change it and adapt it from your typical shopping cart and make it some type of device for transportation that has the added feature of becoming that extended shopping cart once you arrived at a place that you would need to store things. So whereas a typical shopping cart functions in a shopping center, you get it when you go in and you leave it when you go, this would be something that you bring with you and becomes your transportation. So for me, I was saying I don't own a car anymore since I moved to Ireland. So everything that I'm doing is on foot, and I only can buy what I can carry. So having something that is would get me to a place and also serve as a way to transport my goods would be helpful. So we kind of have modified the idea, kept the original idea that it stores groceries or items, goods, and added the function of it becomes our transportation. We had a few ideas flying around about kind of how we would create it. So we came up with kind of like a tricycle base, right? So we'd have 2 wheels in the back, 1 in the front. The wheels would be, instead of your typical shopping cart wheels, which often get stuck or lose their function, they would be more like, picture like a ball and socket joint, maybe like a Dyson vacuum. You guys know what I'm talking about? So that way it would at least reduce the chance of that typical shopping cart wheel that happens. So visually speaking, you would have the front of it would look like a bicycle. It'd be on that tri-wheel support, and you'd have like a typical seat. And then when you arrive at the grocery store, you would dismount, and then you would extend the basket kind of over where the seat would be. So the spatial footprint would be about the same of the bike, but so you're not gonna look like a maniac going into the store with like some big device. Like it would probably even be smaller than your average shopping cart. We toyed around with the idea of like a sidecar, but so that's like a separate option. Like if you want to buy it, or like if you have like a small dog or child to like put in that, that's your decision. We can't supply the Chihuahua, though. That's not on us. That's something you have to do for yourself. Anything else I'm forgetting, team?
Eliminate the child bank that are in the card, and then using this as a side card, because it's more comfortable and it's more fancy too.
Yeah, that's right. So you're not going to have that little child's shelf in your typical cart that kind of takes up room, so it gives us more usable space. There would be obviously a solar panel with backup pedals in case something went awry with the solar panel. And magnifier multiply. We felt like we're not literally multiplying, but we've given it multiple functions where it was just a shopping cart. Now it serves as the 2 things. Magnifying in the literal sense, we felt like that's the opposite of what we were going for. We wanted something small, transportable, and that can be kind of compressed. So we went more with the multiply.
I like the eliminating the child.
Yeah.
My favorite part.
Just the child.
I love that the word dismount was used as well.
Well, you guys had a cooler, realistic shopping cart while we had some crazy acid stopping umbrella.
I think that's important too, though. If you're caught in that acid rain, that shopping cart isn't going to do anything for you.
Yeah, you're right. And then we can throw the acid on the haters. But I mean, at least we all got to thinking how we can use our products, which was the point of everything. So yeah, Lewis, take it away.
Okay, thank you guys for coming to this event. I hope you found everything useful and had some things to reflect on. I guess this event the purpose of it was for networking also. So here are mine and Alex's socials. If you want, you guys can pop your socials down in the chat, and we'll see you in the next meeting.